The envelope sitting on my kitchen counter had a bright red violation notice stamped across it, and I knew before opening it that my day was about to get worse. I had just gotten back from the community center, still wearing my winter snowsuit because the temperature outside was hovering around 15 degrees in Boulder, Colorado, and I honestly did not want to freeze walking the 3 blocks back to my townhouse. My name is Xavier Ashford, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Estates community for nearly 4 years without a single issue with the homeowners association. Until today, apparently. I ripped open the envelope and pulled out the formal notice. The words were typed in an aggressive font that somehow managed to look condescending. Dear Mr. Ashford, it has come to our attention that on January 14th, 2025, you were observed wearing outdoor winter gear inside the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center. This is a direct violation of Section 7.3b of the Community Standards and Decorum Guidelines, which states that residents must maintain appropriate indoor attire while utilizing shared community facilities. Outdoor clothing including but not limited to snowsuits, ski jackets, snow pants, and winter boots must be removed upon entry. Your fine is $500, payable within 14 days. I read it 3 times to make sure I was not hallucinating. $500 for wearing a snowsuit inside. I had been at the community center for maybe 10 minutes, just long enough to pick up a package that had been delivered there by mistake. The temperature inside was not exactly tropical either, since the heating system had been acting up all winter. Most people kept their jackets on. The notice was signed by Patricia Henderson, the HOA president, a woman who had made it her personal mission to police every aspect of life in Meadowbrook Estates. She was in her early 50s, with that particular haircut that seemed mandatory for HOA presidents, the kind that demanded to speak to managers across America. I had dealt with her before over trivial matters like my mailbox being a quarter inch too far to the left, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor, Tom, who had lived here for 8 years. He picked up on the second ring. Tom, did you get a fine for wearing a coat inside the community center? What? No, why would I get a fine for that? Because apparently it is against the rules now. I just got hit with a $500 fine for wearing my snowsuit inside. Tom laughed, then realized I was serious. You are joking. That cannot be real. I am looking at the notice right now. Section 7.3b of the Community Standards and Decorum Guidelines. I have never heard of that section in my life. Patricia must have added it recently. She has been on a power trip lately, but this is insane. I hung up and immediately pulled out my copy of the HOA guidelines from my file cabinet. I had received them when I moved in, a thick binder of rules and regulations that I had skimmed once and never looked at again. I flipped to Section 7.3 and found subsection B. It was definitely there, but the text looked newer than the rest of the page, slightly different font, slightly different spacing. I checked the revision date at the bottom of the page. December 28, 2024, less than 3 weeks ago. This was clearly a new addition, probably implemented during the December board meeting that I had missed because I was visiting family in Oregon for the holidays. I wondered how many other residents had been blindsided by this ridiculous rule. I needed to contest this immediately. I sat down at my computer and drafted a formal appeal letter, citing the absurdity of the rule and the fact that most residents were unaware of its existence. I also pointed out that the community center's heating was inadequate, making it unreasonable to expect people to remove their winter gear. I printed 3 copies, put one in an envelope addressed to Patricia Henderson, kept one for my records, and decided to hand-deliver the third directly to the HOA office the next morning. That night, I could not sleep. The injustice of the situation kept replaying in my mind. $500 for staying warm. It was not about the money, though $500 was not nothing. It was the principle. It was the fact that someone like Patricia Henderson could arbitrarily create rules that made no logical sense and then enforce them with impunity. The next morning, I bundled up in my regular winter coat and walked to the HOA office, located in a small building near the community center. The office was only open 3 days a week, and luckily Tuesday was one of them. I pushed through the door and was hit with a blast of warm air. The HOA office apparently had no problem with their heating. A young woman sat at the front desk, probably early 20s, looking bored. "Can I help you? I need to submit a formal appeal regarding a violation notice I received. Leave it in the box." "I would prefer to speak with someone directly about this." She sighed heavily, as if I had asked her to solve a complex mathematical equation. "Mrs. Henderson does not take walk-ins. You have to schedule an appointment. When is her next available appointment?" The receptionist clicked through something on her computer. "February 4th. That is 3 weeks from now. My fine is due in 2 weeks. Not my problem. Those are the rules." I placed my appeal letter on her desk. "Fine. Make sure she gets this today." I left the office feeling more frustrated than when I entered. This was clearly a system designed to discourage people from fighting back. Make it difficult enough, and most people would just pay the fine to avoid the hassle. But I was not most people. I spent the rest of that day researching HOA laws in Colorado. I discovered that while HOAs had broad authority to create and enforce rules, they still had to follow certain legal requirements. Rules had to be reasonable, consistently enforced, and properly communicated to all residents. A rule that had been added less than a month ago, with no apparent notification to the community, seemed like it might not meet those standards. I also discovered that I was not the only victim. I created a post on the Meadowbrook Estates Facebook group, asking if anyone else had received fines for wearing winter clothing inside community facilities. Within an hour, I had 12 responses. People had been fined for wearing snow boots in the clubhouse, for having scarves on while checking their mailboxes in the mail room, and one person had been fined for wearing a beanie inside the fitness center. The fines ranged from $300 to $700, seemingly arbitrary in their amounts. The common thread was that Patricia Henderson had personally issued every single one of them. A woman named Susan commented that she had tried to fight her fine and had her appeal denied within 24 hours with no explanation. Another resident mentioned that Patricia had been on a mission to elevate the standards of Meadowbrook Estates and had been implementing increasingly strict rules since she became president 6 months ago. This was bigger than just my situation. This was systematic abuse of power, and it needed to be stopped. I decided it was time to hire a lawyer. I had a friend from college, Marcus, who had gone into real estate law and specialized in HOA disputes. I had not talked to him in a couple of years, but we had stayed connected through social media. I sent him a message explaining the situation. He responded within minutes. "This is one of the most ridiculous HOA cases I have heard in a while, and I have heard some doozies. I would be happy to take this on. Can you come to my office tomorrow?" I met Marcus at his office in downtown Boulder the next afternoon. His firm was small but successful, occupying the 3rd floor of a renovated brick building with a view of the Flatirons. Marcus looked the same as he had in college, just with slightly grayer hair and better clothes. "Xavier, good to see you, man. Sorry it is under these circumstances." We shook hands and he gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "So, tell me everything." I walked him through the entire situation, showing him the violation notice, my copy of the guidelines with the recent revision date, and screenshots of the Facebook group posts showing that many residents had been similarly targeted. Marcus leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his lips. "Okay, so there are several issues here. First, the rule itself is arguably unreasonable, especially given that the community center apparently has heating problems. Second, there is a question of whether proper notice was given to residents about this rule change. Third, we have potential selective enforcement issues if some people are being fined while others are not. So I have a case. You definitely have a case. The question is how we want to handle it. We could contest your individual fine through the HOA's internal appeals process, but based on what you have told me, that seems unlikely to succeed. We could file a lawsuit, but that is expensive and time-consuming. Or we could take a more direct approach." "What kind of direct approach?" "I send Patricia Henderson a strongly worded letter on law firm letterhead, laying out exactly why this rule is legally problematic and why the fines are unenforceable. Sometimes that is enough to make an HOA back down, especially if they realize they are on shaky legal ground. If she does not back down, then we escalate. How much is this going to cost me for a letter? $200. If we have to actually file suit, we are looking at a retainer of $5,000, though if we win, we can often recover attorney fees from the HOA. In Colorado, if an HOA acts in bad faith, they can be on the hook for all legal costs plus damages." I thought about it for approximately 5 seconds. "Send the letter. Great. I will need you to sign a representation agreement, and I will need copies of all these documents. I should have a letter ready to go by tomorrow morning." We spent the next 30 minutes going through paperwork and making copies. Marcus asked detailed questions about the HOA board composition when Patricia had been elected, what the typical attendance was at board meetings, and whether any other board members seemed to support or oppose her policies. I told him that Patricia seemed to operate mostly independently, with the 2 other board members, both elderly and generally passive, rubber stamping whatever she proposed. The board meetings were sparsely attended, usually just the 3 board members and maybe 1 or 2 residents. Most people in Meadowbrook Estates were busy professionals who did not have time or interest in HOA politics. "That is pretty typical," Marcus said. "HOAs often become dictatorships by apathy. Nobody pays attention until something directly affects them, and by then the power structure is already entrenched." I left his office feeling better than I had in days. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. Finally, there was going to be some pushback against Patricia Henderson's arbitrary rule-making. The next morning, Marcus called me. "Letter is drafted and ready to send. I am going to email you a copy so you can review it, but I think you will like it." I did not hold back. I opened the email on my phone. The letter was 3 pages of dense legal language, but Marcus had helpfully highlighted the key sections for me. He pointed out that the rule had been implemented without proper notice to residents, that it was unreasonable given the circumstances, that the fines were disproportionate to the alleged offense, and that the entire situation potentially violated Colorado HOA statutes regarding fair governance. The letter concluded with a demand that my fine be rescinded immediately, that the rule be removed from the community guidelines, and that all other residents who had been similarly fined be refunded. It gave Patricia Henderson 5 business days to respond before Marcus would proceed with filing a formal lawsuit. "This is perfect," I told him. "Send it. Already done. Sent it certified mail, so she will have to sign for it. She should receive it tomorrow or the day after. I spent the rest of the week in a state of nervous anticipation. I kept checking the tracking information on the certified letter. It was delivered on Thursday morning at 9:15. Patricia Henderson signed for it herself. Then I waited for the explosion. It came Friday afternoon. I received an email from the HOA office, sent to me and apparently to the entire community based on the massive CC list. The subject line was regarding frivolous legal threats. The email was exactly what I expected. Patricia defended the rule as necessary to maintain the community's standards. She claimed that the rule had been properly implemented according to HOA bylaws, and that all residents had been notified through the December newsletter, which I definitely had not read. She characterized my hiring of a lawyer as an aggressive and hostile act that threatened the harmony of the community. She concluded by saying that the fine would stand, and that any future legal action would be met with the full resources of the HOA. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a simple message. "I guess she is not backing down." Marcus responded, "Perfect. Now we have documentation of her refusing to address legitimate legal concerns. This actually helps our case. I will start drafting the lawsuit." Over the weekend, I received dozens of messages from neighbors. Some supported me, saying it was about time someone stood up to Patricia. Others were critical, saying I was causing unnecessary drama over a simple rule. A few were worried that a lawsuit would drain the HOA reserves and lead to increased fees for everyone. That last concern bothered me. I did not want to hurt my neighbors financially. I called Marcus on Monday morning to discuss it. "Is there a way to do this that does not cost the HOA and by extension everyone in the community a ton of money?" Marcus thought about it. "Well, here is the thing. If we sue and win, Patricia could potentially be held personally liable if we can show she acted in bad faith or exceeded her authority. That is not guaranteed, but it is possible. Also, if this goes to court and we win, the judge could order the HOA to reimburse us for legal fees, which would come from HOA funds, yes. But it would also be a clear message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Sometimes short-term pain leads to long-term gain. What if we tried one more thing before filing suit? What if I demanded an emergency board meeting? You can do that. According to most HOA bylaws, residents have the right to petition for special meetings. How many signatures do you need? I checked my copy of the bylaws. It requires 15% of homeowners to petition for a special meeting. There are 200 units in Meadowbrook Estates, so I would need 30 signatures. That is doable, especially with how many people have been fined. Try that. Get your signatures, demand a meeting, and we will present the case directly to the board. If Patricia is overruled by the other board members, this whole thing could be resolved without litigation. I like that plan. I created a petition document that afternoon, laying out the issues with the rule and demanding a special board meeting to address it. I printed 50 copies and spent the evening going door to door in my section of the neighborhood. The response was mixed, but ultimately positive. Most people agreed the rule was ridiculous, though some were hesitant to sign anything that might put them in Patricia's crosshairs. By the end of the night, I had 18 signatures. Over the next 2 days, I collected another 23, giving me 41 total, more than enough. I submitted the petition to the HOA office on Wednesday morning. The same board receptionist took it from me without comment. This requires the board to schedule a special meeting within 10 days, I told her. I will make sure Mrs. Henderson gets it. It is not just for Mrs. Henderson. It is for the entire board, she shrugged. Same thing. I left feeling like I had accomplished something, but also knowing that Patricia was not going to make this easy. Sure enough, I received an email that evening from Patricia personally. She acknowledged receipt of the petition and informed me that a special board meeting would be held on Saturday, January 25th at 7 in the evening at the community center. She also noted that only those who had signed the petition would be allowed to attend, as it was not a regular board meeting. That was fine with me. Most of the people who signed were eager to see this through. Marcus agreed to attend the meeting as my legal counsel. I will be there in a purely advisory capacity, but my presence might help them take this more seriously. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. Patricia sent out another community-wide email, framing the petition signers as troublemakers who were wasting the board's time and resources. She doubled down on defending the rule, citing vague concerns about standards and property values. Several people contacted me privately, asking to add their names to the petition. I told them they could attend the meeting anyway. This was supposed to be about the community, not about creating division. Saturday evening came. I arrived at the community center at 6:45 to find the main meeting room already set up with rows of chairs facing a long table where the board would sit. About 35 people were already there, milling around and talking in small groups. The energy was nervous but determined. Marcus arrived a few minutes later, wearing a suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked every bit the professional attorney, which was exactly the image we wanted to project. At exactly 7, Patricia walked in, followed by the two other board members, George Winters, a retired accountant in his 70s, and Linda Murphy, a pleasant woman in her 60s who mostly seemed to go along with whatever Patricia wanted. They took their seats at the table, with Patricia in the center. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel. This special meeting of the Meadowbrook Estates Board of Directors has been called at the petition of certain residents who take issue with a properly implemented community standard. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that this board has been elected to serve the best interests of the entire community, and we will not be bullied or intimidated into abandoning our responsibilities. I raised my hand. Mrs. Henderson, I believe this is supposed to be an open discussion, not a lecture. She gave me a cold stare. You will be given an opportunity to speak, Mr. Ashford. Please wait your turn. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. Let her dig her own grave." Patricia continued with a 10-minute defense of the rule, hitting all the same points from her emails. The community needed to maintain standards. Property values depended on residents presenting themselves appropriately. The rule was no different from dress codes at country clubs or upscale restaurants. On and on. Finally, she opened the floor for comments. I stood up immediately. Mrs. Henderson, board members, thank you for holding this meeting. I want to be clear about what we are asking for. We are not trying to undermine the board or attack anyone personally. We are simply asking for the removal of an unreasonable rule that is being enforced in a way that feels arbitrary and punitive. I walked through the same arguments Marcus had made in his letter. The rule was implemented with inadequate notice. It was unreasonable given the heating problems in the community facilities. The fines were disproportionate. And most importantly, the rule served no legitimate purpose. What community standard are we actually upholding here? I asked. What harm is caused by someone wearing a snowsuit inside for 5 minutes while picking up a package? How does that affect property values? How does that harm anyone? Patricia tried to interrupt, but George Winters held up his hand. Let him finish, Patricia. I was surprised. George had always seemed like a passive ally of Patricia's, but maybe there was some independent thinking there after all. The real issue here, I continued, is that this rule gives the appearance that our HOA is more interested in control than in serving the community. 41 of your neighbors signed a petition in less than a week because they see this rule for what it is: unnecessary, arbitrary, and punitive. We are asking the board to acknowledge that this rule was a mistake and to remove it from our guidelines. I sat down to a smattering of applause. Patricia looked furious. Marcus stood up next. If I may, I would like to add a legal perspective to this discussion. My name is Marcus Chen, and I am representing Mr. Ashford in this matter. I specialize in HOA law, and I can tell you that this rule is legally problematic for several reasons. He walked through the same issues from his letter, but in simpler terms that everyone could understand. He explained that Colorado law requires HOAs to act reasonably and in good faith, and that rules must serve a legitimate community purpose. He noted that the inadequate notice and the disproportionate fines could both be grounds for a court to invalidate the rule. I want to be clear, Marcus said. We did not come here looking for a fight. Mr. Ashford hired me only after his attempts to resolve this through normal channels were unsuccessful. We are here tonight hoping that this board will do the right thing and rescind this rule voluntarily. If that happens, this matter is over. If it does not happen, we will be filing suit in Boulder County District Court next week, and I am very confident we will prevail. He sat down. The room was silent. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. Is that a threat, Mr. Chen? It is not a threat, Mrs. Henderson. It is a statement of fact about the legal process. George Winters cleared his throat. Patricia, can I speak with you and Linda privately for a moment? Patricia clearly did not want to, but she nodded. The three board members huddled at the far end of the table, speaking in low voices. The conversation went on for several minutes. We could not hear what was being said, but the body language was telling. George was gesturing emphatically. Linda was nodding along with him. Patricia was shaking her head, her arms crossed defensively. Finally, they broke apart and returned to their seats. George spoke first, which was unusual. We have discussed this matter, and I want to say something. When this rule was proposed at the December meeting, I voted in favor of it because Patricia presented it as part of a broader initiative to improve our community standards. I did not think much about it at the time because Patricia handles most of the day-to-day operations, and I trusted her judgment. He paused, looking directly at Patricia. But I have to admit, after hearing the concerns raised tonight, I think we made a mistake. This rule does not serve a meaningful purpose, and the enforcement has been too aggressive. I move that we rescind Section 7.3b of the Community Standards and Decorum Guidelines effective immediately and refund all fines that have been issued under this rule. Linda quickly seconded the motion. Patricia looked betrayed. George, we discussed this. We agreed that maintaining standards was important. We did discuss it, but circumstances change. 41 residents signed a petition, Patricia. That is more than 20% of our community. When that many people are telling us we got it wrong, we need to listen. And what message does it send if we cave to threats of litigation? Marcus stood up again. It sends the message that your board is reasonable and responsive to community concerns. That is a good message, Mrs. Henderson. George called for a vote. All in favor of rescinding Section 7.3b and refunding related fines. George and Linda both raised their hands. Opposed, Patricia raised her hand alone. The motion passes 2-1. Section 7.3b is hereby rescinded, and all fines issued under that rule will be refunded within 30 days. The room erupted in applause. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We had actually won. Not through a lengthy legal battle, but through showing up and making our case clearly and with legal backing. Patricia stood abruptly, grabbed her papers, and walked out of the room without another word. Linda looked embarrassed. George just looked tired. "If there is no other business," George said, "this special meeting is adjourned." People started filing out, many of them stopping to shake my hand or thank me for pushing the issue. Marcus packed up his briefcase, looking satisfied. "That went about as well as it possibly could have," he said. "Honestly, I am a little surprised. I expected her to fight harder." I think George surprised her. She probably thought she had him in her pocket. "Well, this is a win. Your fine will be refunded, the rule is gone, and you did not have to spend months in litigation. Enjoy it." We walked out together into the cold January night. The temperature had dropped into the single digits, and I was grateful for my heavy winter coat. I wondered if Patricia would have tried to fine me for that too, given the chance. I thought that would be the end of the story, but I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I received a summons. Not from Patricia or the HOA, but from the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. I was being asked to come in for an interview regarding financial irregularities related to the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I called Marcus immediately, confused and more than a little worried. "Did we do something wrong? Why are the police involved?" "You did not do anything wrong. This is about the HOA, not about you. My guess. Someone reported suspicious activity, probably related to finances." "Do not worry, but do not go in for an interview without me present." "When is the appointment?" "Thursday at 2. I will meet you there at 1:45. Do not stress about this. If they are investigating the HOA, we are going to cooperate fully." Thursday came, and Marcus and I met outside the sheriff's office in downtown Boulder. The building was modern and official-looking, all glass and concrete. We checked in at the front desk and were led to a small conference room where a detective was waiting. Detective Sarah Ramirez was in her 40s, professional and direct. She shook our hands and gestured for us to sit. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Ashford. I understand you have been having some disputes with your HOA." "That is correct, though I thought we resolved them." "You may have resolved your immediate issue, but your situation brought some other matters to our attention. We have been investigating financial irregularities in the Meadowbrook Estates HOA for the past several months, and some information you provided has been helpful." I was confused. "What information did I provide?" "Your lawyer's letter referenced the fines that were being issued. It gave us a reason to look more closely at where that fine money was going. According to HOA records, dozens of fines have been issued over the past 6 months, totaling more than $30,000. But that money has not been deposited into the HOA's main accounts." Marcus leaned forward. "Where did it go?" "That is what we are trying to determine. We have obtained a warrant for the HOA's financial records, and we are in the process of auditing them. What we have found so far suggests that Patricia Henderson may have been directing fine payments to a separate account that she controlled personally." I felt my jaw drop. "She was stealing the fine money." "That is what it looks like. We are also investigating whether she created some of these rules specifically to generate revenue that she could divert. Your Snowsuit rule, for example, resulted in 13 fines totaling $6,400 in just 3 weeks. None of that money went into the HOA accounts. This was way beyond what I had imagined. I thought Patricia was just a power-hungry HOA president. I did not think she was actually committing crimes." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Just your cooperation. We are going to be interviewing everyone who was fined, and we will need documentation of the fines and any payment you made. We are also going to need you to testify if this goes to trial." "I did not actually pay my fine. I contested it before the deadline." "That is fine. Anyone who did pay will be especially important to our case. We are treating this as theft and embezzlement. If our investigation confirms what we suspect, Mrs. Henderson will be arrested and charged. We spent another 30 minutes going over the details. Detective Ramirez was thorough, asking about every interaction I had with Patricia, about the petition, about the board meeting. She was particularly interested in the fact that Patricia had walked out immediately after losing the vote. Did she say anything to anyone before she left? Did she seem panicked or just angry? Just angry, I think, but I was not paying that close attention. We tried to contact her yesterday for an interview, and she did not respond. We went to her house this morning, and a neighbor said she left 3 days ago with several suitcases. Marcus and I exchanged glances. You think she ran? I think she knew this was coming. We are working on tracking her down. We have flagged her passport and her credit cards. She will not get far. I left the sheriff's office feeling like I had stumbled into something much bigger than a dispute over a dress code. An HOA president embezzling money was serious criminal activity. People could go to prison for that. Over the next week, the story exploded in the local news. The Boulder Daily Camera ran a front-page article about the investigation into Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. Other residents started coming forward with their own stories of unreasonable fines and Patricia's increasingly erratic behavior. One resident mentioned that Patricia had fined him $2,000 for having the wrong color flowers in his front yard, claiming it violated aesthetic standards. He had paid it to avoid further hassle, and now he was furious to learn that money had likely gone into Patricia's pocket. The total amount of embezzled funds kept growing. By the end of the investigation, detectives estimated that Patricia had stolen more than $60,000 over an 8-month period. She had created dozens of trivial rules specifically designed to generate fines, targeting residents who were less likely to fight back, and then directing those payments to an account she had set up under a fake business name. Patricia Henderson was arrested 2 weeks later in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She had been staying at an extended stay hotel, apparently planning to flee to Mexico. The arrest made the evening news. I watched the footage of her being led out of the hotel in handcuffs, looking nothing like the imperious HOA president who had ruled over Meadowbrook Estates with an iron fist. She was extradited back to Colorado and charged with multiple counts of theft, embezzlement, and fraud. The district attorney's office pursued the case aggressively, partly because HOA fraud was becoming an increasing problem in Colorado, and they wanted to send a message. The case took several months to wind through the court system. Patricia initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Bank records showed the diverted funds. Dozens of residents testified about the fines and the payments. Even the other board members, George and Linda, testified that they had been unaware of the separate account and had never authorized Patricia to collect fines in that manner. In June of 2025, Patricia Henderson accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony theft and embezzlement and was sentenced to 4 years in prison followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to the individual residents she had defrauded. The impact on Meadowbrook Estates was significant. The HOA had to hire an outside management company to handle operations while they reorganized. George Winters resigned from the board, saying he felt terrible for not catching the fraud earlier. Linda Murphy also resigned. A special election was held, and 3 new board members were elected, all of them younger residents who promised transparency and common-sense governance. The new board's first action was to conduct a comprehensive review of all HOA rules. and eliminate anything that seemed arbitrary or overly restrictive. More than 30 rules were removed or modified, including several that, like the Snowsuit rule, had clearly been designed to generate fine revenue rather than serve any legitimate community purpose. As for me, I became somewhat of a local celebrity in the neighborhood. People would stop me at the grocery store or the gas station to thank me for standing up to Patricia. Some called me a hero, which felt excessive. I had just been a guy who did not want to pay a ridiculous fine. Marcus and I remained friends, and he jokingly offered me a job as a paralegal specializing in HOA cases. "You have a natural talent for spotting their nonsense," he said. I declined but appreciated the offer. The most satisfying moment came in August when I received a check in the mail from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. It was a reimbursement of the $500 fine I had never paid, along with an additional $200 for inconvenience and distress caused by improper HOA governance. The check came with a letter from the new board president, apologizing for what had happened and promising that the community would do better going forward. I framed the letter and hung it in my home office, a reminder that sometimes standing up for what is right actually works. It does not always work. Sometimes the system grinds you down. Sometimes the powerful stay powerful and the rest of us just have to deal with it. But not this time. This time, justice actually prevailed. The community changed after the scandal. People started paying more attention to HOA meetings. Attendance went from 2 or 3 residents to regularly 20 or 30. People asked questions. They demanded accountability. The new board embraced the scrutiny, publishing detailed financial reports and sending out monthly newsletters explaining their decisions. Property values in Meadowbrook Estates actually increased after the scandal, contrary to what Patricia had always claimed would happen if we did not maintain her rigid standards. Turns out buyers liked knowing they were moving into a community with transparent governance and reasonable rules. I ran into George Winters at the community center one day in September. He looked healthier than he had during the Patricia era, less stressed. We chatted for a few minutes about the changes in the neighborhood. "I owe you an apology," George said. "I should have been paying more attention. I should have questioned some of those rules. I just got complacent and let Patricia run everything." "You voted the right way when it mattered," I told him. "That is what counts. I still should have caught the financial stuff. I am an accountant, for crying out loud." That was literally my job for 40 years. She was hiding it pretty well. Even the police needed warrants and subpoenas to track it all down. Still, I let the community down. I did not know what to say to that. He was probably right that he should have been more vigilant, but beating himself up about it did not help anyone. "The new board is doing great," I said. "The community is in good hands now. Maybe that is your real legacy from all this. You helped transition us to something better." He smiled a little at that. "Maybe, I hope so." We said goodbye, and I continued my walk around the neighborhood. It was a beautiful Colorado autumn day, the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides, the air crisp but not yet cold. I was wearing a light jacket, and I realized I could walk into the community center right now without taking it off, and nobody would find me or even comment on it. That thought made me smile. The criminal case had one more twist. In October, about a month before Patricia was scheduled to begin her prison sentence, her lawyer filed a motion claiming that she was mentally unfit to serve time. They produced reports from psychologists saying she suffered from various personality disorders that had driven her behavior. The district attorney fought the motion, arguing that Patricia had been perfectly competent when she was planning and executing her fraud. The judge ultimately agreed with the prosecution. The sentence stood. Patricia Henderson began serving her sentence at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility in November of 2025. I did not attend any of her court hearings after the initial arraignment. I had moved on with my life. But I did follow the news coverage, and I felt a sense of closure when she was finally behind bars. The whole experience taught me several lessons. First, HOAs are only as good or bad as the people running them, and it is important to pay attention to who those people are and what they are doing. Second, standing up to authority is uncomfortable and sometimes risky, but it is necessary when that authority is being abused. Third, having a good lawyer is invaluable. And fourth, never underestimate the power of a snowsuit to change your life. If I had just paid that $500 fine, if I had not made a fuss, Patricia would probably still be running Meadowbrook Estates and stealing from residents. My refusal to accept an unjust rule set off a chain of events that exposed a much larger crime and ultimately led to real accountability. I am not saying I am some kind of crusader. I was just a guy who was annoyed about a stupid rule. But sometimes, that is enough. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "This is not right," and refusing to back down. The snowsuit itself became a minor legend in the neighborhood. At the fall community picnic, someone had made T-shirts with a cartoon snowsuit and the caption, "Meadowbrook Strong." It was silly, but people loved it. I bought 3 of them. As winter approached again and the temperature started dropping, I found myself thinking about that day I walked into the community center wearing my snowsuit, completely unaware that such a simple, practical decision would lead to all of this. If I could go back in time and warn myself what was coming, would I do anything differently? Probably not. Maybe I would have worn an even puffier snowsuit, just to really make a statement. Life in Meadowbrook Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new HOA board was competent and reasonable. The rules made sense. People felt heard and respected. It was what an HOA should be, an organization that handles the practical necessities of shared property management without trying to control every aspect of residents' lives. I never did get that appointment with Patricia Henderson that the receptionist had offered me for February 4th. By that date, Patricia was already under investigation and scrambling to cover her tracks. The appointment was moot anyway. The matter had been resolved, just not in the way she expected. Marcus and I got together for dinner one evening in December, almost exactly a year after the snowsuit rule had been implemented. We met at a steakhouse in Boulder, one of those places with dim lighting and excellent wine lists. "To snowsuits," Marcus said, raising his glass. "To snowsuits," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. "You know, I have been practicing HOA law for 15 years, and your case is definitely in my top 5. Top 5, not number 1. Number 1 involved a guy who built a catapult in his backyard to launch pumpkins at his neighbor's house. The HOA tried to fine him for having an unapproved structure, but it turned out the catapult violated about 6 different criminal laws, so it became more of a police matter. Okay, I concede that is more interesting than a snowsuit. We talked about other cases, other absurd HOA rules he had dealt with over the years. There was the HOA that tried to ban children from playing outside because it was too noisy. The HOA that demanded all dogs be under 20 pounds, forcing families to give up their pets or move. The HOA that tried to control what kind of furniture people could have on their balconies, leading to a dispute over whether a bean-bag chair counted as furniture. Why do HOAs keep doing this stuff? I asked. Why do they keep making these ridiculous rules? Honestly, I think it is a combination of good intentions gone wrong and petty tyrants finding a place where they can exercise power. Most people who join HOA boards genuinely want to help their community. But then you get someone like Patricia who sees it as an opportunity to control people, and if nobody checks that power, it spirals out of control. So what is the solution? Vigilance. Participation. Exactly what your community is doing now. When residents pay attention and hold their boards accountable, HOAs work fine. When people tune out and let one person run everything, you get situations like yours. We finished dinner and went our separate ways. Driving home through the snowy streets of Boulder, I felt grateful for how everything had turned out. It could have gone so much worse. I could have paid the fine and stewed in resentment. I could have fought it and lost. I could have been blacklisted in my own community for causing trouble. Instead, I ended up helping expose a criminal, improving the governance of my HOA, and becoming friends with my neighbors in a way that never would have happened otherwise. All because of a snowsuit. When I got home that night, I hung my winter coat in the closet and noticed my snowsuit on the hook next to it. It was the same one I had been wearing that day in January. I had not worn it since, not because I was afraid to, but because I just had not needed it. Colorado winters were cold, but not every day required a full snowsuit. I ran my hand over the insulated fabric, remembering the absurdity of the whole situation. $500 for staying warm. It still seemed unbelievable. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Susan, one of the residents who had been fined for wearing boots in the clubhouse. She was one of the new board members. Board meeting next week Tuesday at 7. Hope you can make it. We are discussing snow removal protocols. I texted back. I will be there, and I would be. Because that was the whole point of everything that had happened. Stay engaged. Pay attention. Make sure the people in charge are doing their jobs properly. It was not exciting work. It was boring and bureaucratic and time-consuming, but it was necessary. That is the real lesson of the snowsuit incident. Not that you should fight every petty rule, though sometimes you should. Not that all HOA presidents are criminals, though some are. The real lesson is that democracy, even democracy at the tiny level of a homeowners association, requires participation. It requires people to show up, to ask questions, to refuse to accept answers that do not make sense. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat down in my living room, looking out the window at the snow-covered street. Meadowbrook Estates looked peaceful in the winter darkness, lights glowing warmly from windows, smoke curling from a few chimneys. It was a good place to live. It was my home. And I was going to make sure it stayed that way, one boring board meeting at a time. The end of the story was not dramatic. There was no final confrontation, no last-minute twist. Patricia Henderson went to prison. The HOA got better leadership. Life went on. Sometimes that is how justice works. Not with a bang, but with a series of small, deliberate steps in the right direction. I never saw Patricia again after that board meeting where she stormed out. I did not attend her trial or her sentencing. I did not write her angry letters or celebrate her imprisonment. I just moved on, which felt like the healthiest thing to do, but I did not forget. I kept that framed letter from the new board hanging in my office. I kept the newspaper articles about the investigation, not as trophies but as reminders. Reminders that standing up for yourself matters. Reminders that seemingly small injustices can be symptoms of larger problems. Reminders that one person really can make a difference, even if that person is just a regular guy who got mad about a fine for wearing a snowsuit. Years from now, when I tell this story, people will probably think I am exaggerating. A $500 fine for wearing a snowsuit inside. An HOA president embezzling $60,000. It sounds too absurd to be true. but it is true, every word of it. I have the documentation to prove it. And somewhere in a storage unit, I still have that snowsuit. I thought about donating it to Goodwill, but I could never quite bring myself to do it. It is more than just winter clothing now. It is a symbol. A reminder of the day I decided not to just accept an unjust rule, and everything that followed from that decision. So here I am, almost a year later, living in a better managed community with reasonable rules and accountable leadership. The whole experience was stressful and time-consuming and occasionally frightening, especially once the criminal investigation started. But it was also empowering. It proved that the system, for all its flaws, can still work when people engage with it honestly and persistently. If you are reading this and thinking about your own HOA, about rules that do not make sense or leadership that seems questionable, I encourage you to speak up. Start with the simple steps. Read your bylaws. Attend a board meeting. Ask questions. If you do not get satisfactory answers, push harder. Get your neighbors involved. Document everything. And if necessary, hire a lawyer who knows HOA law. Most disputes will not escalate to the level mine did. Most HOA boards are not run by criminals, but even small improvements matter. Even getting one bad rule changed makes the community better for everyone. That is what I learned from my snowsuit fine. That is what I will carry forward. And if I ever move to a new community with an HOA, the first thing I am going to do is read every single rule carefully and show up to every board meeting. Because vigilance is not just about catching wrongdoing. It is about preventing it in the first place. The snowsuit hangs in my closet, ready for the next truly cold day when I need it. And when that day comes, I will wear it proudly, knowing that no one will find me for the simple act of trying to stay warm.